it's not just you. Yeah, his best friend now. Best friend Eddie go up. Then he can run for Prime Minister. So now cannot.
Dr. Dilara Choudhury, President of Science, Department of Government and Politics, Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh. Dr. Sinharaja Tammita-Delgoda, Distinguished Fellow, Institute of National Security Studies, Colombo, Postdoctoral Fellow, Department of International Relations and Institute of Development. University, I would like to invite Ajay K Mehra, Ladies and gentlemen, we also have Mr. Imtiaz Gul, Executive Director of Research and Security Studies, Pakistan, joining us via Skype as part of this panel in Imbalance. I will now hand the floor to
Myanmar.
Good afternoon. As we reconvene after lunch, we have 4 presentations, and one is from Pakistan. Mr. Imtiaz Gul will be with us via Skype. We have a paper on Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh by Dr. Dilara Choudhury. We will have a paper on Sri Lanka, the politics of imbalance by Dr. Sinharaja Tammita-Delgoda, and a paper by Dr. Jahangirnagar on security and development in South Asia, the role of China. Mr. Imtiaz Gul is still not online, so we will have to manage the session accordingly. Now we have already, in the past session, we have had some expose on issues of security in South Asia and which we most addressed. And we dealt with some of the key questions of security and governance in the Indian context. In fact, in the keynote address, Mr. Shamsaran had laid out, quite a broad perspective within which the question of security and governance has been viewed in the regional context of South Asia. And the complexity of it lies in several questions. The questions are many a times internal to each of the countries of South Asia, and also they are historically rooted in the way the South Asia has taken shape in the past 7 decades. Of course, new questions keep coming up, new questions of security keep emerging. The role of China in the world and in the region also has started, having some impact on the questions of security and governance in South Asia. So the complexity, that South Asia brings out in looking at the questions of security and governance is really engaging for the academic community as well as for the politics. I'm sure several of these questions will come out when each of our speakers make their presentations. We will 20 minutes for each of these speakers. We will begin with Dr. Dilara Choudhury because Mr. Imtiaz Gul is still not online, and when he comes online, we will have a brief presentation of 10 minutes for him, and 10 minutes we will have for question question and answer session after that, because we have to wrap up this presentation and Q&A, kind of in one go. So already here. So can I begin with that? Okay. So sorry, Mr. Imtiaz Gul is already online, and he will make a presentation for 10 minutes as he proposed, and after that we will have 10 minutes special. So Mr. Imtiaz Gul, Student Director of the Research and Security Studies in Islamabad.
Okay, so you can hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I wish I could have been there. I've been looking forward to meeting you all and listening to you and exchanging thoughts. But as just yesterday, basically, the entire program got flat. Still, I'm very happy that we could connect via Skype. And my topic was the Pakistan's response to terrorism. It's a very thorny, very tricky subject because people often conflate terrorism with extremism, and this is a tendency also in Pakistan. So what I will do, I'll insert out by reading some of the points that I've noted down here, and then perhaps when we have time we can go into question and answer if somebody has more queries than I respond to. So I would say that Pakistan's response to terrorism and extremism since the tragic events of 9/11 has been a mixed bag. Statistics from the year 2017 suggests a marked decline in terrorist attacks and fatalities. The anti-terror campaign, particularly since the attack on the Army Public School in Peshawar in December 2014, has been much more coordinated among the military and the police institutions. This has, however, been rooted in application of hard power, mostly hard power directed against anti-state elements. Now, the deaths and injuries linked to militancy have dropped for the third consecutive year, with 21% fewer incidents in 2017 than in the previous year, according to our Center for Research and Security Studies annual security report, which is also up on the website. Some 2,057 people were killed in 2017 compared to about 2,613 in the previous year and 4,647 casualties or fatalities in 2015. So this is a marked decline in the deaths of the terrorist violence. So as a whole, the counter-terror campaign has involved a series of direct military offensives, proactive raids by the military and the police, by the counter-terrorism departments, increased surveillance, both direct and indirect, as well as some attempts to block the militants' sources of funding. Simultaneously, Pakistan has also introduced or improved anti-terror legislation, taken administrative measures against a number of individuals and militant groups, thereby reducing the socio-political space for them. And space for terrorist groups in particular has considerably shrunken because of the application of hard power and because of the evolution of thinking, of evolution of the view on what is good for Pakistan, what is bad, and who is a threat, direct or indirect, to the state of Pakistan as well as to its neighborhood. I would say that generally the anti-terror war has received recognition, even abroad, supported also by the statistical evidence that I just laid out. Yet, I would say we all have problems. There are domestic and external roadblocks to an effective counter-terror campaign. Domestically, I would say difficult socio-political complex and a very complex context. It prevents the primarily civilian leadership from going all out against the religio-political elements who are ideologically inspired by or politically connected, linked with organizations such as Al-Qaeda and of late Daesh. Politicians don't want to jeopardize their electoral interests by directly taking on these groups or their leaders, which operate tens of thousands of mosques and seminaries across the country. Now we have to understand that counter-terror or counter-extremist campaign will succeed only when the community moves. The community is directly linked with the politicians, with their civilian representatives, and civilian representatives, whether part of the local government, the provincial government, or those sitting in the national parliament, they basically have to lead this effort within the community because a lot of extremist ideology flows from the mosques, from the seminaries, and those directly affected by this are the community, and the community has to report it to their leaders and to the police. So somehow the community-based action is, I would say, still missing. So this is a big domestic, political, and socio-political roadblock to an effective counter-terror and counter-extremism campaign. Also, some of the groups such as Jamaat-ul-Dawa or Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed, which have had a history of appeasement by the Pakistan military establishment for their role in the Indian-administered Kashmir. I assume almost everybody would know what has been happening in Kashmir since 1988-89. So this convergence of interests of the Pakistani military establishment and the Kashmiris who have been wanting to go independent of the Indian control, it created an environment, in which a lot of groups and individuals took advantage of. So the presence of these groups in Pakistan, because they operate a number of thousands of seminaries and mosques, remains a thorny issue between India and Pakistan. So India, these groups represent a continuous threat, and it wants Pakistan to abolish what it calls the infrastructure of terrorism. India also seems to be preconditioning the resumption of talks with definitive demonstrable action against all these groups. Now, there are external geopolitical factors that complicate Pakistan's response to terrorism. Its relations with the United States are also defined by its relations with India and Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, with which it has a 26,500 kilometer long border. It also points to the sanctuary. Pakistan also points to sanctuaries in Afghanistan from where anti-state terrorists carry out their terror campaign inside Pakistan. The latest US drone strike, I think about 36 hours ago, which killed 21 Pakistani terrorists in a suicide training camp in eastern Afghanistan, lends also credence to the Pakistani claims. that there are sanctuaries across the border which are used to perpetrate terrorism, acts of terror in Pakistan. And obviously there are accusations from the other side as well that there are sanctuaries inside Pakistan or the Pakistani border territories which the Afghan Taliban use for violence inside Afghanistan. So our contention is, my contention and that of so many others is that the US has been operating drones against terrorists of all shades in the border territory. So I assume that if the CIA would have any information about such training camps on the Pakistani territory, they would not wait a minute to destroy these sanctuaries or these training, as they've been doing. I mean, there's been a massive drone campaign inside the Pakistani border territory in which several dozen Al-Qaeda people were killed, Pakistani terrorists were also killed, and also those who belong to the Afghan Taliban or to the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. So as a whole, there are sanctuaries in the border regions which are used against one another, against each other. Now, another complicating factor, as I pointed out earlier, is the India-Pakistan relations. The arrest of an Indian naval officer, Kulbhushan Jadhav, in Pakistan's Balochistan province, which borders Afghanistan, in March 2016, injected more renewed acrimony into India-Pakistan relations. These ties have been nearly frozen, particularly after the conviction of Jadhav's death in April 2017. Now, according to Pakistani officials, Jadhav admitted to having been hired by India's research and analysis wing to undertake espionage in Pakistan, and also admitted to running a business in neighboring Iran under a Muslim name, Mubarak Hussain Patel. So India, of course, denies the claims and successfully petitioned the International Court of Justice to stay Jadhav's death sentence, and the case is still with the International Court. But the impact of this acrimony between India and Pakistan has been an overall, has had a negative perception of Pakistan abroad. I'm mentioning this because this is directly related to Pakistan's response to terrorism and extremism. Pakistan's legislative and administrative measures to choke terror financing recently came under review at the Financial Action Task Force meeting at Paris between February 18 and February 2nd. And these measures were basically apparently found insufficient, and hence the FATF decided to put the country back on a watch list from June onwards. Now, the threat of being placed on a watch list of FATF basically had prompted Pakistan to take some actions against Jamaat-ul-Dawa and Jaish-e-Mohammed just 10 days before the Paris meeting. But obviously this was on the nick of the hour and was not enough. We had thought this would have taken place much earlier, like say November, December, but as usual, Pakistan authorities were late in taking decisions which would satisfy the international community of its efforts against terrorism and terrorist entities. Now, Washington, this is another thorny issue, Washington-Pakistan relations. The US under President Trump has also increased pressure on Pakistan, increasing military aid, which is actually the reimbursement of security operations that Pakistan Army undertakes. And the US then reimburses those funds, which is called the coalition support funds, and the US basically protects it as a military aid. And I think probably most of you would know how President Trump on January 1st vitiated the entire relationship by calling Pakistan cheat or liar or whatever, so this was the New Year greeting to Pakistan through a tweet. And Twitter is his favorite handle that he's using these days. So, as a whole, the Pakistani effort has been okay, but not to the satisfaction of India or the United States. And the combined India-US efforts have basically led to the tainting of Pakistan's image, in the sense that it's seen as still distinguishing between the good and bad Taliban. And I would say, and I have seen the conflicts in Libya and Syria, that other countries expect of Pakistan to respond to terrorism and non-state actors in a way that they themselves don't do. So if you look at the non-state actors operating in Syria or against the Syrian regime, they're backed by Saudi Arabia, they're backed by Turkey, they're backed by the United States, and the United States publicly sponsors, arms those non-state actors, whereas the Turkish government, President Erdogan, calls these people the Turks, the Kurdish Turks, or the Turkish Kurds, as the terrorists, whereas they are partners of the United States. So, there's a whole gamut of geopolitical factors that basically also underlies what Pakistan is doing. We don't condone it. The partnerships with non-state actors are detrimental to the civil society, to the bureaucracy. But I just wanted to contextualize, what Pakistan has been doing, the 2 of 1 wars together with the American assistance, with the CIA, with the Pentagon. But now, because Pakistan is in a difficult situation, so it's easier, to bruise and to fight a smaller country than take on a country like the United States or other members of the NATO. Now, lastly, I would say that as Pakistan grapples with militancy and terrorist groups operating from the border regions and the situation remains volatile, it's quite evident that much of the violence stems also from a proxy war that Pakistan, India and Afghanistan are currently involved in. The sympathetic mention of the Balochistan province, Pakistan's area-wise largest entity on the Arabian Sea, which Prime Minister Modi mentioned basically in a speech in August 2016. Also the close relations between the Indian National Security Advisor Ajay K Mehra and some Baloch separatist leaders, including Ramdas Bukti, basically offered clear indicators that despite an increasing control over terrorist violence inside Pakistan, it will keep facing what mostly is a consequence of a proxy war and adverse relations with India and Afghanistan. And the response to terrorism, plus its success, will largely depend on whether Pakistan-India relations can return to a normal state-to-state dialogue and whether it can lead to a demonstrable disengagement from their respective proxies. So Pakistan's response to terrorism will also be, I think, measured by its actions against Pakistan-based militant groups, which continue to take advantage of their safe havens to conduct attacks in India, in Afghanistan, and including US interests therein. This is what the National Intelligence Director, the US National Intelligence Director Dan Coats said recently before a Senate Intelligence Committee. Coats also alleged that during a hearing of he also alleged that despite Washington's request to do more, the Pakistan army is only trying to appear tougher against the Taliban and Afghani militants. So this is a very debatable issue. I don't want to drag this here. The last thing I would like to say is that it's clear that Pakistan's military and civilian apparatus has to further step up its campaign across the board against all shades of militants, non-state actors. B, reinforce legislation against all sorts of facilitating financial and socio-political tools. And C, rationalize its discourse on relations with countries such as India, because therein most probably lies the key to stability and a fruitful, constructive dialogue with India as well as Afghanistan, and it will, I think, directly impact, positively impact also its relations with the United States. Thank you very much. Yeah, I can still can stay on like for another 15-20 minutes.
The chair will be told to ask if there are any questions.
Sure, sure.
So this is Ajay Mehra. I'm chairing this session. Thank you very much for giving a broad overview of the situation there and how Pakistan looks at external and internal.
Sorry, I can't hear the question. You know, if somebody can take this on and I can't hear.
What do we do?
Somebody close to the computer actually says, hi. So I'll have to read it out.
Yeah, okay. We can have some questions. Can anyone, yeah, can you identify yourself? Yeah. Right. Now you ask the question, she will ask. She will try. Yeah, come closer and then the question.
Yes, hello, Mr. Imtiaz Gul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello, hi.
Hi. Okay. So, all right. My question is on the Afghan on the sanctuaries of terrorists in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think one point that you have brought up is that if indeed there are terrorist sanctuaries in Pakistan, then why is Pakistan building a fence along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan? It is Afghanistan that does not recognize the UN line. It feels that by Pakistan building a fence, you are actually turning the UN line into concrete, which Afghanistan does not recognize. Look at Donald Trump. He wants to build a wall with Mexico, but I think he should use the money to help Pakistan build a wall with Afghanistan. Now, yes. So, and the other point I think you did not bring up is that Pakistan ought to remind the world that in February 2010, it was Pakistan who arrested several key members of the Afghan Taliban in Pakistan, and when Pakistan did so, it was praised by the Obama administration in the United States. But I think even the diplomats of Pakistan have forgotten to remind the world this, and so I think you got to remind this to the world. And okay, the other point. Sorry, I just last sentence. Okay. Sorry, and the other thing, I think we are a bit reserved on the role of India, because even if India it doesn't regard the Convention of Colombo, the spokesman of the Taliban Pakistan, Hassan, especially on the funding of separatist outfits in Balochistan. My last point, I'm going to make this within 10-20 seconds, is that, so this is a question, is on the rise of extremism in Pakistan. Yes, I'm very satisfied on the actions that Pakistan has taken on terrorism, but I'm very displeased with what Pakistan has, the actions that Pakistan done on extremism. Look at the by-elections of NA 120, where the Tehreek Ya Rasulullah won almost 5%. So, I mean, and the rise of very extremism in Pakistan. Someone like Khatib Hussain, sorry, I'm done. Thank you, sir.
Okay, should I respond to this or should we take more questions?
Please, can you take all the questions and then can I respond?
Or maybe I can respond to this and then the next one.
Yeah, please. Okay. This is the small.
Are you going to get around? Okay.
Please respond.
Well, on the issue of friends, I would say that the Afghans, have this romance with the Durand line, as they call it. This was the border demarcated, drawn, at the time drawn by the British back in 1873. And now, this entire border with Pakistan's internationally recognized territory as a member of the United Nations. And Pakistan, I guess, as a sovereign country, entitled to do whatever it can or whatever it wants on its own territory, regardless whether the Afghans recognize it or not. You cannot really draw maps, you cannot really draw borders. And I think therein lies Pakistan's justification for fencing the border, just because it's very treacherous, it remains porous. Of course, there are other factors to the infiltration, cross-border infiltration of militant or terrorist groups. But I think if other countries, including the United States, do want to plug the border through fencing or through a wall, no other country should have a problem with that. And somehow the Afghans, I guess, will have to reconcile with the fact that this line now basically separates them from Pakistan, and that they shall have to put up with the fact that this is de facto now an international border. As far as Jadhav is concerned, I don't want to go too much into this, but the problem is the Pakistan's security establishment has caught somebody which they believe that has been deployed as a spy for operations inside Balochistan. I have a couple of WhatsApp conversations with a leading Indian publisher who had invited Brahmda Pukti, the Baloch separatist leader, to India on a 4-month tour to write a book on relations with Baloch. And this guy also took a letter from Brahmda Pukti to Ajay Gul, your national security advisor, asking for asylum. So there are certain indicators that you can make, and if you start connecting those dots, then perhaps a picture emerges which speaks of how India, in a very calculated manner, have been using Afghanistan and Balochistan to avenge what it thinks Pakistan has been doing in Kashmir. So this is like a tit for tat, and both have been involved in this, and that's why I said, unless both countries return to a normal state-to-state dialogue and pull back their proxies, it will be very difficult to eliminate terrorism or extremist terrorist violence from inside Pakistan altogether. And as for, I think we talked about Tehreek-e-Ladakh Rasool. That is, as a member of civil society, as I would say, the first and foremost responsibility for controlling these people. There was a bunch of people in 2000. This responsibility rested with the provincial police as well as with the federal police, and they are both under the ruling party. So they should have, in the first place, stop these people from occupying a critical junction that connects Islamabad with Rawalpindi. So this government failed, the police failed, the capital administration failed, were reluctant in taking definitive action, and then in the end they basically entered into an agreement with the signatures of the Interior Minister Hassan Iqbal. So that was, I think, a surrender, I would say, sort of a surrender of authority by the government itself. And they shouldn't have done this, and they drew a lot of condemnation from all over. And I think that was a black spot in our history, that the government, 8,000 strong police force gave in or succumbed to a couple of thousand, 2,000 or 2,500 people's protests, and then which led to a very notorious agreement between the government and those protesters.
Thank you, Mr. Gul.
Yes, please.
No, thank you, Mr. Gul. We are running out of time, so we will move to other speakers. Thank you for being with us via Skype. You made up for your absence physically, but your presentation has been very, very good.
Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
All the best for your conference.
Thank you very much. So we have had this presentation on Pakistan, and some of the points that have been raised will come up again further for discussion. Now we move to Dr. Dilara Choudhury, who will be giving us a presentation on the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh, security, governance, and solidarity. Thank you.
First of all, my thanks to the organizer of this workshop. The title is wrong here, it is wrong. Rohingya in Bangladesh, security, governance and solidarity. I would like to begin by saying that up until now, what I heard from the paper presenters and the discussion, it has been very, very Indo-centric. We have not heard about the security risk and the risks which are undermining the governance of these poor countries like Bangladesh. So when I got this invitation, I really jumped, because we have a situation in Bangladesh which is not only undermining the governance of our country and the security of our country, but an issue which may actually destabilize the whole region. So very briefly, if I can move to the next slide, I am not going to go into any details, but what I am going to try to say here is that refugees since World War II has become a very, very important issue, which is actually threatening the security of many countries. There are actually 65 million displaced people all over the world. Of course, there are categorizations. Some are called refugees according to the international definition of 1951 UN Convention. Then we have displaced people, we have immigrants, we have asylum seekers. Immigrants we will actually leave out from our discussion. My discussion will be basically on the refugees, although the people we have, Rohingyas who have entered Bangladesh, Bangladesh does not consider them the refugees, because Bangladesh is not a party with the UN Convention. This Rohingya problem has been brewing in Myanmar for decades, actually. And not much attention was given to this issue by the world. Dates back decades since these Rohingya conflicts have been going on in Myanmar. Rohingyas are the people who have been living in the northern part of Rakhine state, formerly known as Arakan, since 18th century. They were given Burmese nationality when Burma became independent. But their predicaments actually started when military takeover took place. Military took over the country in 1962. Since then, there has been not a declared policy, but unofficial policy of making Rakhine Rohingya free. And this has been going on through stigmatization, isolation, discrimination, persecutions and all that. I'm not going to detail because all of you know the history of the Rohingya predicament and how the Rohingyas have entered Bangladesh. So I will start from there. Today Bangladesh is the host of the largest refugee concentration. Rohingyas entered Bangladesh twice before, large influxes in 70s and early 90s. Both times, in 70s, they were sent back through negotiation and with the help of YC and UN. 92-93 situation was different because by then the Rohingyas had lost their citizenship through the citizenship law of 1982. So Burma actually at that time were not ready to take back all the Rohingyas because they were insisting on the documentation of their nationality. But anyway, through negotiation, but this time it took long time. It started in 1993 and the repatriation took place until 1999. And many of them actually were forced back, and for which Bangladesh was criticized. That Bangladesh was a great country, Bangladesh does not want to host helpless people and people who will face persecution by being pushed out. And many of them did come back, even after the deportation was over. The new problem, and since then until 2012, the freeing of the Rohingyas never ceased. There are always trickles of Rohingyas coming to Bangladesh. Situation became very great from 2012, and we know that in 2017, through genocide, large-scale Rohingyas actually entered Bangladesh. Within 3 months, 600,000 Rohingyas entered Bangladesh, on top of 300,000 or more than 300,000 Rohingyas living in Bangladesh in camps and also as unregistered people, population. So this was a huge burden on Bangladesh and has been and still is a burden on Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a resourceful country, it is overpopulated, and we sincerely cannot really host this large number of people in Bangladesh. The problem here is that while Burma was carrying on its policy of Rohingya-free Rakhine, not much was done by the international community, especially by our special friends India and China. And obviously, what was to happen, happened. And so Bangladesh's governance has come under insecurity. Both have come under severe strain. And this morning we discussed that how misgovernance creates insecurity and insecurity creates misgovernance. And Bangladesh's policy, though Bangladesh did not have, unfortunately, did not have a refugee policy until 2014, but Bangladesh has been hosting refugees since Bangladesh became independent. For example, the stranded Pakistanis, the Urdu-speaking people who opted for Bangladesh, Pakistan. We gave 300,000 of them undocumented citizenship in 2009. And another 300,000 are living in UN-administered camps. So, though Bangladesh is criticized that it does not have a refugee policy, it is not a good host, Bangladesh did actually host a number of refugees besides the Rohingyas. Now, when the Rohingyas came in large number, in such a quick period of time, span of time, Bangladesh was really perplexed. So initially what Bangladesh tried to do is push them back. Then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina opened the border. And the exodus began. The challenges Bangladesh faces in providing the services, basic humanitarian assistance and security to all these people have been actually overwhelmingly for a country like Bangladesh. But thanks to the help from the international community, UN agencies, international NGOs and local NGOs and individuals, situations somewhat have been brought under control there are host of problems, lots of problems which Bangladesh cannot really handle. The challenges are too much. So for Bangladesh, for Bangladesh there are three options. First one is to repatriate back to their country of origin with human dignity, human rights and safety. Second is integration of this population within the host country. And the third is resettlement. Repatriation, we know, I'm sure all of you know, under the influence of China, by this foreign minister came to Bangladesh, brokered a deal between Bangladesh and Myanmar for a bilateral negotiation to which Bangladesh agreed. Besides, pursuing the multilateral diplomacy as well. Repatriation from the beginning has been actually doomed to failure. For a number of reasons, I'm not going to go into the details, but repatriation has been facing difficulties. The Myanmar government has not stopped their killing, their torture, their brutalities, and now they have a new way of driving the Rohingyas back, and that is to starve them to death. Those who actually stayed back, not many, even they are being driven. You know that history. But then so repatriation, Bangladesh has not been possible. When it comes to integration, when we look at the integration problem, we find that, for example, that if that is not also possible for Bangladesh. For example, Bangladesh is an overpopulated country. Man-land ratio is very, very precarious. Bangladesh has its own socio-economic problems. Bangladesh also is afraid that if too many people, that many people live in that kind of condition, they may be pulled by the extremist forces. They are a source of environmental degradation also. So for a number of reasons, integration is not possible. Now we come to the third possible option, which is resettlement. Now resettlement or relocation, for this, of course, we need in South Asia, like Europe, an asylum seeker system. None of the South Asian countries actually has a accepted inertia to South Asia. But South Asia, none of the countries has a refugee policy. So when it comes to relocation, we need the solidarity. This morning we heard from the ambassador that for South Asia to go ahead, we need the solidarity. Now what is that solidarity? We do not see any solidarity. Both the friends of Bangladesh, India and China, stood beside Myanmar like a rock. China, being the member of the UN Security Council, vetoed every time there was a proposal to condemn China. Bangladesh had pinned much hope on India because India is our special friend. Recently, Indian High Commissioner has said that India and Bangladesh are now enjoying an era of golden period. Now, if this is a golden period, would India take any Rohingyas from us? I don't think so. Because India's policy towards Rohingya has been much like Myanmar. So that solidarity I really do not see in South Asia. Now, we have to remember, especially India, which is the largest power, regional power, aspiring to be a global power, that India really cannot become a global power unless India takes her neighbors with her. Without leaving the neighbors, India alone cannot do or get what India wants to get. Now, with China, of course, we know that China does not have any asylum, history of asylum seekers. Secondly, China's human rights situation was never discussed or not bothered. India is a democratic country. India should uphold the democratic principles that India will ensure the rights of all, including the ones who will seek shelter in India, which India has done for years and generations. So that solidarity is not found in South Asia. When we look at Southeast Asia, we find that ASEAN countries are as silent as India and China. None of the South Asian countries will agree to take any Rohingyas, although in 2012, when the Rohingyas were driven out by the Myanmar, when the new spate of violence began, Indonesia and Malaysia took some. But this time, Indonesia has said that there is no way that Indonesia will take any of these Rohingyas. Australia, which is a member of the signatories of the convention, UN convention, has said no, no, no. So Bangladesh is settled with this more than 1.5 million refugees. And this is what it will do to Bangladesh. It will undermine Bangladesh's governance. This is an election year. Already Bangladesh with election, there are a lot of problems, with election we are having. And the presence of these Rohingyas will undermine the governance to such an extent that Bangladesh may become destabilized. And the point I'm trying to make here is that if Bangladesh becomes destabilized, it will engulf the whole region. So our large, powerful neighbors should keep this in mind, that destabilization in Bangladesh is not in the interest of their interest. With that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choudhury. We began by talking of porous borders, and here, apart from the porous borders, we are also talking about how neighborhood policies impinge on security, stability, governance, everything put together. We are running short of time, so we will be requesting the participants to maintain time very, very strictly. 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Deputy Commissioner. Thank you to NUS, IS, and CPA, and to my esteemed chair. I hope I can take a minute or two past it without you noticing. This is a story of 4 quotations. It has its origins in the theme essay brilliantly encapsulated this afternoon by Professor Mishra. Without security, there can be no governance. Without governance, security. This is a case of 4 quotations. It begins with one and ends with another. And here it's scripture. In his first volume of his study of politics and governance, a defense of the constitutions of the government of the United States of America, John Adams watching and balancing are the only of security. Power must be opposed to power, interest to interest. John Adams explores the structure of modern international government. He begins his letter by discussing the happiness of nations which he observes depends chiefly on their form of government. One of the foundations of government is, of course, balancing. Since independence, the idea of balance and non-alignment has formed the foundation of Sri Lanka's foreign policy. Despite tilting towards different power blocs at different times, the thinking has always been that Sri Lanka's security and stability will be best served by following the middle path, maintaining equidistant relationships with the USA, Russia, China, Japan, Pakistan, and India. As E.R. Moore neared his final conclusion, President Mahindra Rajapaksa came under enormous pressure from Western powers to suspend the offensive and resume peace talks with the liberation campaigners in Lanka. This gave rise to the impression that UK, USA, India, and the EU were sympathetic towards the terrorists. Only China and Pakistan were unflinching in their support. This saw the beginnings of a distinct tilt towards China. Confronted by Western hostility caused by the UN for investigation of war crimes, persistent friction with India and Tamil Nadu, and a worldwide campaign Colombo became closer and closer to the trade. The interrelation campaign was very rapidly divided, which the government saw as a solution for healing the roots of war. China was the only country willing and able to support Sri Lanka's development. This increased her reliance on China, accentuated a sense of imbalance. The argument deployed against the Rajapaksa's was that in alienating India, USA, and the West and Europe, it had become too dangerously dependent on China, leading to a dangerously one-sided policy. Influential groups, led by the former United Nations Secretary General, reiterated the importance of foreign policy as Sri Lanka's first line of defense. In abandoning the tried and tested strategy of balance and non-alignment, they argued that the Rajapaksa administration was in danger of compromising the country's national interest and security. The end result, they warned, would have adverse domestic and international repercussions. Criticisms and warnings such as these seem well-founded when several factors combined to unseat Mahinda Rajapaksa in the 2015 presidential elections. Coalition government, the United National Front for Good Governance, was formed by several parties, led by the United National Party and a section of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, headed by President Maithripala Sirisena. Headlines proclaimed the return of balance to Sri Lanka's foreign policy. On Independence Day 2015, the new president proclaimed a return to the middle path in India significantly. On his first state visit to India, President Sirisena assured New Delhi that Sri Lanka would take a balanced stance which would favor neither India nor China. Simultaneously, there was almost immediate outreach, dialogue and engagement with America, Europe and Japan. Visiting Japan in June, the foreign minister announced Sri Lanka's foreign policy has moved back to the center. Now, to maintain a position at the center is not easy. The semantics of the word balance, well, what does it mean? It describes an action or an activity that requires the maintenance of equilibrium between different situations, different requirements. You have to make gestures, actions to both sides. You have to make gestures to both sides of the spectrum. Implicit in the idea of the middle path, this is what is required to keep the structure stable. As senior politician, Finance Minister Dr. Sarath reiterated during Modi's visit, taking sides is not rational in Sri Lanka's interest. This is what it leads to. The art of balancing entails careful judgment, a highly tuned sense of symmetry. This is what keeps the scale stable. In 2015, China's investment in Sri Lanka amounted to $4 billion. She had become the country's largest investor, its largest lender, largest source of development aid, and second largest import partner. During the presidential and parliamentary elections of 2015, the Chinese threat had been one of the main themes of the coalition campaign, driven by international pressure to reduce Sri Lanka's dependence on China. The new government made its difference very clear. When I was Prime Minister last, we had good relations with the United States, India, and China. The Rajapaksa regime, they destroyed that. They fought with the West, they fell out with India, and they thought China would be their savior. On March 2015, Sri Lanka suspended the Colombo port city. This suspension was announced a few days ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit, estimated at $1.4 billion. It is the single largest foreign investment in the country's history. Envisaged a massive real estate development which would place Sri Lanka as a leading financial center in Asia. It epitomizes for many Sri Lankans its ambition to become the financial business hub of the Indian Ocean. Now, this suspension remained in place for more than a year. Enormous damage was done to Sri Lanka's reputation as a destination for foreign investment. 2015, foreign direct investment from China had dropped dramatically. In 2014, it had been 400 million. 2015, it had fallen to 66 million. 2016, Sri Lanka's credit rating was downgraded from stable to negative by Standard & Poor's. 7 months later, Bloomberg ranked Sri Lanka as one of the worst risks for investors. Unlike the port city, the port in Hambantota was funded by loans. Since its opening in November 2010, the port had been losing 147 million a year. By the end of 2016, the government was struggling to keep up the debt repayments. The Rajapaksa regime had no intention of surrendering the port to the Chinese. If the relationship had been different, it may have been possible to reschedule or renegotiate the debt. However, with suspension of the port city in full swing, relations at an all-time low, there was no room for maneuver. China pulled in the debt. And the new government was forced to go even further. With the economic crisis spiraling out of control, they offered the port up under a debt for equity swap. There was an outcry from the trade unions, several opposition parties. The administration was accused of selling out the country's assets, and violent public protests ensued. Of course, with deep-seated hostility, the administration was forced to renegotiate. Ultimately, it still had to resell the port for 99 years. In the interest of rebalancing, Sri Lanka had only succeeded in undermining its relationship with China. It now had to pay the price. Despite its very public criticism of China, the very government favored by America, India, and the West had to concede much more to the Chinese than the Rajapaksas had ever given them. India's expectations of the new government were well known. It anticipated that long-delayed economic partnership would be pushed through. This was now revived as ECA. It was also anticipated Sri Lanka would reduce its military and commercial engagement with China, and that there would be further devolution of power and some level of autonomy to the Tamils of Sri Lanka's northern province. On his first visit to Sri Lanka, Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for the early full implementation of the 13th Amendment, which would be part of the Indo-Lanka Accord in 1987. This called Sri Lanka to merge the north and the eastern provinces. This generated almost immediate opposition from several parties within and without the government. One of them, the Marxist-Leninist JVP, denounced it as, well, this is something forced on us by India. It is not our solution to the ethnic problem. The new government was very quickly to move to support ECTA. It announced that the two sides would sign the framework agreement by 2016. This crystallized mass opposition to India amongst all sections of the Sri Lankan Republic, who feared that the country would be swamped by cheap Indian labor and cheap Indian products. There was tremendous opposition to this proposed agreement. February 2016, there were mass protests by nearly 8,000 professionals. The proposed agreement will be 4 times more beneficial to India. Our chances will be the same. What we witness is that Indian leaders have their people's interests at heart, while our leaders are not interested in safeguarding our rights. Are they the government? Fearing Narendra Modi? The subject became so inflammatory that it was not discussed when Prime Minister Vikram Singh's visit to New Delhi in 2016. In 2017, it was announced that negotiations would still proceed, but at Sri Lanka's own pace. John Kerry's visit to Sri Lanka in May 2015 marked the first official trip by a US Secretary of State in 43 years. Since 2009, the USA had led 5 resolutions against Sri Lanka. Reduced its financial diplomatic engagement to a bare minimum, it had concentrated on arraigning the Rajapaksas for conduct during the Iran War. Kerry's visit heralded a new era. The two sides now agreed to revive, renew, and strengthen their relationship. Sri Lanka, at the epicenter of the main sea lanes between East and West, occupies a pivotal position at the heart of the Indian Ocean. It is the world's most important commercial highway. During the previous regime, America, Europe, Japan had been deeply concerned, alarmed, and marginalized by what they felt was the growth of Chinese influence. Recent events had seen a sharp decline in American, Western, and Japanese influence on the island. As a global and maritime superpower, the United States needed to re-establish itself, regain access and influence. Your country sits at the crossroads of Africa, South Asia, and East Asia. With this strategic location, Sri Lanka can serve as a fulcrum for a modern and dynamic Indo-Pacific region. We see our role partly as a convener, as a leader, but more importantly, as a partner. In return for reducing Chinese influence, the regime anticipated that there will be a massive inflow of American and Western aid to service the debt and drive the economy. But the Good Governance Coalition was also banking on real and meaningful support for development. Using Chinese funds, the Rajapaksas had transformed the infrastructure of the country. However, more electricity, more bridges, more roads and more railways were needed to continue and carry on the transformation they had begun. This was not forthcoming. At the same time, the succession of American visitors emphasized the need to meet the requirements of the United Nations resolution. In 2015, Sri Lanka decided it would sponsor a new resolution with the USA entitled Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights. This avoided an international investigation and recommended a hybrid mechanism involving foreign judges as part of a local investigation. Even this caused massive outcry at home, and the government was seen to be giving in to unsubstantiated allegations of war crime and being called on to respond to international pressure by sacrificing members of the armed forces. It was attacked for being servile and working with a section of the international community. In 2017, the high priests of Malwaka, Askirya and Ramaiah, three of the great Buddhist orders of Sri Lanka, warned that what they were doing would lead to the undermining of the country. Far from being its first line of defense, it seemed that the country's foreign policy was undermining Sri Lanka's national security at a time when the nation was still vulnerable to terrorist activity. In Jaffna, the Sri Lankan policemen were attacked with swords by a gang receiving funds from the LTT diaspora. In 2016, Sri Lanka's High Commission in Malaysia was attacked at Kuala Lumpur. I'm sure it'll be safer in Singapore. So at a time when concessions were being made, it seemed that national security is still being challenged, that nothing very much has really changed. So it seems that Sri Lanka's national security is being undermined at a time when the nation is still vulnerable. We also have many Tamil diaspora organizations being banned on account of their links with the LTT under the Rajapaksas. Some of these groups have played a pivotal role in orchestrating the international campaign against Sri Lanka. From 2015 onwards, you have the government overturning previous precedents, holding talks with the Tamil diaspora and then reducing the number of prescribed organizations and people listed by the previous administration. February 2018, Independence Day, television screens across the country carried pictures of Tamil Tiger supporters protesting against the Sri Lankan High Commission in London, waving LTT flags, chanting Tamil Gilan slogans, they trampled on Sri Lanka's national flag. In reply, the Sri Lankan military attaché was seen making a gesture. Following, he was suspended in England following an immediate outcry. Sri Lanka's foreign minister suspended him. This led to an outpouring of anger across Sri Lanka. Faced with a huge wave of support, the president immediately revoked the suspension, ordering his reinstatement. Despite the government's best efforts to balance and engage, it seemed that neither diaspora or influential sections of the Tamil community in the north had been touched by the policy of balance. All it seems is the government became more and more undermined. It appeared weaker, more irresolute. The Balancing Act is a delicate operation. Using John Adams' definition, can only be described as a watchful state of considered calculation, matching power to power, interest to interest. Sri Lanka has veered from one extreme to another. In its determination to compensate and rebalance, it has rushed headlong towards the opposite end of the axis. This has generated a profound imbalance. The seesaw balance can only be achieved when the core is stable. The more Sri Lanka's government has sought to balance or rebalance, the more it is undermining its own foundation. Eroding its security, its stability, and its popularity at home, it is only unbalanced for itself. The local elections of 2018 was meant to elect local representatives for administrative bodies across the country, the lowest tier of government. Long delayed, these elections were seen as a national referendum general election. The electoral map captures the tidal wave of protest and dissatisfaction which swept through the heart of the country. only the north and parts of the east remain apart. I shall end with, strangely enough, a working paper from the Institute of South Asian Studies, which defines this entire issue while working to share and compromise with foreign powers so as to avoid confrontation and volatility and encourage growth and economic collaboration. The Sri Lankan government should not find itself in a situation where it is giving too much to all. The sovereignty of the country should not be lost in an attempt to divide itself equally amongst foreign powers. Seeking to give all that it could to different foreign powers in the cause of a balanced foreign policy, the good governance coalition has become deeply unbalanced. Losing sight of its own national interest, it has undermined the very foundations on which it stands.
Thank you very much for Dr. Delgoda for finishing in time. Without much ado, we move to next paper. We're running out of time. So this is Dr. Ajay Gul on security and development in South Asia, the role of China. China's role has come in for discussion, and I hope Dr. Lu would throw some light on it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very delighted to be here to introduce my paper, Security and Development in Southeast Asia, and would like to share some ideas with you. And thank you very much for Professor Mitra and all the ISAS staffs for organizing this wonderful conference. Thank you very much. First of all, so I will give a short introduction of the outline of the papers today. And I will, in the first part of my presentation, I will talk about China's current influence or China's relations with South Asia. And secondly, I will compare India's approach to South Asia and China's approach to South Asia. And the third part, I will suggest the concept of co-governance. I will trade India, China, and South Asian countries as together as a state system, and I will discuss talking the co-governance concept with you. And lastly, I will just talking about the challenges ahead, about the security development in South Asia, and can provide some policy suggestions of what we can do next. First, I will start it with the map, and we can see that China is in a direct neighborhood of South Asia. It borders 5 of South Asian countries, and so although the country is very different, China belongs to the East Asian cultural circles, and South Asia, it developed a culture of its own, and the main barrier, geographic barriers, the Himalaya. But now in a new era, I mean, due to development of technology and in a globalized world, these kind of geographic barrier disappear to some extent, or there's lots of new elements added in that we should think South Asian or the regions in a broader context, or we should add some new ideas, not always constrained in the region or constrained by the geography. And China's relations with South Asia developed very quickly. I mean, since the 1990s, China has developed very intensive economic relations with South Asian countries, and especially under the present President Xi Jinping. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which is at the beginning, I mean, this initiative was raised in 2013, in September and October. And now it's already 2018. There's lots of new contents added in, and the concept has moved on. So at the beginning, we can see as two roads through the Eurasia. One is 21st Maritime Silk Road. It started with China's coastal regions to go through the Indian Ocean and connect it East Africa. And the other one is go through the continent, which is designed along the traditional old Silk Road. But now, at the beginning, we are talking about countries along these two roads. But now it says, no, we won't talking about countries along the roads, because it's an open initiative. So this is welcome the countries that would like to join in, and this is the countries would like to join to negotiate some project under the initiative. We're calling countries related to Belt and Road Initiative, not previously like countries along Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, this is a very important point to understand current Belt and Road Initiative and the move of the concept. That some new things just coming into it. And in this proposed economic corridors, in this Belt and Road Initiative, we see that there are there are 6 economic corridors. Like China is the center and expanded according to its image of its own, and wanted to increase the connectivities in the regions. This connectivity is not only about infrastructure, but also about finance, culture, and all these kinds. There's 5 kinds of connectivities that China is currently promoting on. And there are 2 corridors which is in India's major concerns. One is China-Pakistan corridor, and the other one is the Bangladesh-China, India-Myanmar corridors. The 6 of these, the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridors was actually an old initiative which is proposed by the Chinese side in the late 1990s at the Track 2 level, and which is later then integrated. It has been talking along, and the initiative started with India's northeast region in Calcutta. There's lots of discussion talking about these initiatives with China, but now it's also gradually elevated to the Track 1 level, but now until when it was integrated to this proposed Belt and Road Initiative, India started with the skepticism of India has increased towards these BCIM corridors, and it also has a stagnancies right now. And China-Pakistan corridor, I mean, for all the reasons all of you know, that India feels a lot of pressure on this. You see that actually this is the things that based the road now we are talking about. CPA is based on the Karakoram Highway, and Karakoram Highway it's a road built in the started with 1960s and finished completed in the late 1970s. So if we're talking, this is already used for several decades, but now under the CPA, it is raised again. That is, impinges India's sovereignty. I mean, it's just not only. This is not only about the road, but it's about lots of connectivity, economic investment. And from the Indian side, I was kind of afraid that the CPAC will make Pakistan stronger, and this is of course, were not in India's strategic interest in the subcontinent. And this is also, India feels that it was not consulted in the BRI at the very beginning, which and there's but if we look at the lots of readings, especially from the statements of the Ministry of External Affairs, we can see that, and as a Chinese, when I read these spokesmen's statements, I see there's lots of misunderstanding about BRI, and just talking, but later I will explain it a little bit more about because actions or intentions of a state is usually, it's designed, it's implemented, but how the other countries perceive it is a different questions. So India's approach towards South Asia, won't give too much time on it. I think most of you are South Asian, most of us here, so quite familiar with India's approach towards South Asia. And so Indians would like to stay the caring elder brother. Even, I mean, this is under the Gujarat doctrine, it's moved towards a more soft power strategy. But this kind of Indian-centric or Indo-centric things is there. And as a very important point here, you see that India is at the center of South Asia, and it has deep cultural and historical and ethnic linkages. So that it's special point that these kind of linkages will make India's easily to intervene small neighbors' domestic politics, and things are and which makes the relations very difficult between India and South Asian countries. On the other side, they dependent on India, but on the other side, they also feel that they want to keep their national identity. And there's a clear zero-sum view on security embedded in South Asian strategies. In the Indian perspective, it don't want to be undermined of its strategic premises. And China's approach towards South Asia, I mean, it's a development-oriented bilateralism. And this is started with the Chinese reform in the 1970s. We see that the main consideration is China want to domestic development, to want to reform, to want opening up. And this is very important if China will have a peaceful external environment. I mean, these policies keeps going since the 1990s. There's a lot of changes within the Chinese foreign policies, but these core concern stays until today. And currently, under Xi Jinping, there's a renewed focus on neighboring countries. I mean, in the past, at the beginning, we looked a lot in East Asia, like Japan, North Korea, or Southeast Asia, because we have lots of Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia. We have lots of investments, mutual investments with the region, and then it's the West, Europe, the United States, and that's all. But in the recent years, especially since the 2013, when President Xi Jinping came to office, we see there's emergence of news about new regions, that is South Asia and Africa and Central Asia. So you mean that suddenly if we open the newspaper, you see the scales of reaching out the different regions is quite different. Comparing to a couple of years ago. And we see that since the reform and Chinese progressively build its capability in infrastructure building. And its kind of development is also based on infrastructure building to take the domestic needs. And I'm also, each time I studied abroad in Taipei for a long time, each time when I come to China, I was really surprised. So how this infrastructure developed. And these, under the Belt and Road, I mean, it's already since before the Belt and Road. We are talking about Belt and Road. It's not only started in 2013, but it's already started at the very, so if Chinese businessmen are underway, it's the Belt and Road things. This is lots of scholars are talking about. And these, it fill gaps that India has failed to provide neighbors, like in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, and also in Bangladesh. There's lots of Chinese infrastructure buildings in terms of energy and roads and connectivity. And a very important point here is why South Asian small neighbors of India feel good or sometimes in dealing relations with China, because China sticks to this non-intervention of domestic politics in South Asia. I do not meet so many Indians in Beijing, but there's surprisingly a lot meets lots of South Asian small countries. There's people from small South Asian countries. They all emphasize that China's, which is good, is sticking to the non-intervention of domestic policies. And currently, China's approach towards South Asia, in the 2005, where China was accepted as an observer of SAARC, and at that time, China was hoped that China could engage SAARC in a more broader way, in a multilateral way. But the stagnancy of SAARC and the BCIM in recent years are and especially like India has initiated its own regional platform like BBIN or BIMSTEC, and makes China think that multilateral should not be the good way or effective way dealing with South Asian countries. This is why China currently thinks that consolidates that idea that bilateralism will be more effective in the region. So there's some misunderstanding of BRI, but so that Chinese government tried to promote some kind of but there's but they won't say that how we can bridge this gap. And this China also tried to promote a little bit in other countries in its newspaper and try to change the image of BRI, but the problem is BRI is a project, a grand project, and with lots of small projects. And if your intention is good, design is also okay, but how could you guarantee the implementation on the ground? So how Chinese can convince the others is also a big challenge. There's a lot of countries that welcome, but there are also countries that skepticism towards the initiative. And there's countries within one country, there are people who like it and there are people who don't like it. There's always, if something comes out, there's always something that some parts of the society can benefit, but not all. This is also the way that of Chinese reform. I mean, Chinese reform, I don't know whether you were taking news of recent news that China's have the Congress it's currently, which will last 2 weeks. And there's another new reform that China launched domestically. It's the next grand move of China within, so it's the poverty elimination, because China, after several decades of rapid growth, there's this big discrepancy within Chinese society, and now China would like to make this, if we distribute a cake, would like to share the cakes with more equal. So this is a second, the domestic big move. So which means China still needs a stable domestic external environment, which is important to implement this kind of reforms in China. And BRI is also a grand strategy. It's not only connected with the China's with the world, but also connected with China's domestic development as well. So I will not have so much time, so I will quick go through the end. The first is the co-governance of India and China. I traded India and China and other South Asian countries as state systems, and we see that previously it is China and Pakistan and the other small countries. This is the previous structure. If we go through the realism's idea that power configurations in South Asian countries, the first picture, and the second one is the current situation. And that means this is the reality that China comes to South Asia, and it will keep a kind of moderate balance of power, or kind of competition, we say to that. But China cannot compete with India in this sense in terms of cultural linkages. What China can do is maybe fill some gaps of South Asian country and provide more possibilities for other South Asian nations to develop, because now China also develops something which is good, like in its agriculture, in health. China has a very good, I just read a recent example that China aids, do lots of things on health security, cooperated with Lanka's government. And this is something like disaster management or this kind of thing. This is something that China can provide knowledge or provide this kind of vocational training in South Asian countries. And this is also China's plan that in Pakistan that will provide kind of vocational training to eliminate or to improve the employment in the region. So if people like so if India can accept China's role in these kind of things, there will be a kind of moderate competitions in terms of influence. But then, I mean, if India can accept, then the peace and stability will be it's possible. Because we know that India, China, and Pakistan, 3 nuclear powers in the region. And if India and China fight each other, and due to their deep mistrust between each of them, it's really difficult. And now we see that this kind of growing attention in the post-Trump period, and we see that territorial disputes. This is 2 things that in China currently pick lots of focus on. And we say there is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if China will constantly projected as a threat to the South Asia or to the India, and then China will also take this kind of positions towards itself and constructed a very constructed enmity, and that I think this is not in South Asia's interest. A stable region which will be interested in China, South Asia, and other South Asian nations. And this is the what recent Indian ambassador to China talked to a Chinese neighbor. I think it's very important to talk to each other and not talk past to each other. This is the most important things, because due to also my experience, also I see there's lots of we have a very, very different way of understanding things due to our political system and due to our culture. So, and there's the only way is to talk to each other and talk more. And without talking, we see that this kind of Indian-Pakistan things, border issues, there is great potential of world in South Asia. So, and cooperation in less sensitive issue as human security and structural bilateral conversation between India and China in South Asian affairs. This is my suggestion, and I hope that this could open some insights and discussions later. Thank you very much, and thank you very much. So I take some minutes to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. So we have had 4 presentations. And some of the very contentious issues that are part of South Asia. the parts of South Asian perception, I should say, each of the countries about each other, and some of the very, very real problems that each country faces vis-a-vis the other. Also the Chinese perspective, how China is perceived and how China perceives. So taking all these things into account, I open the session for discussion. Short questions, pointed questions to each of the presenters, and Dr. Mitra takes the ball.
Thank panel for some excellent papers. Let's start with thanking Dr. Dilara Choudhury for reminding us that if one is not careful, one can be 50%. You're absolutely right. I would like to thank Sinharaja and my special David for highlighting of Islamabad. I remember watching on it because this is what we do. Then our young people like this, but when they're quoted, I feel ISAS-CPA is a dying one today. My question is this. It's nice to be able to do the balancer. In game theory, it's called the leader. Small powers can balance two big powers and in the bargain get more power than force at their command. That's a nice position to have. And Sri Lanka has done it before. 1962 India-China war. It was Sri Lanka which was into reform. 1965 Soviet Union against India and Pakistan. The question to you is a theoretical and conceptual question. Why can some powers succeed in becoming pivots or balancers and some not? My examples will come from China and India. China today is presenting its policies as balancers in Myanmar, in Maldives, in Nepal. India tried something on those lines with Rajiv Gandhi offering to mediate between the Sinharaja and the Tamils, and but didn't quite succeed. 1,027 dead bodies came back. No awards were given. That was India's most disastrous war. And similarly, India tried to appear protecting the minorities in Nepal, but didn't quite. Now, you take Yangu's presentation of the Chinese, you are the Chinese, and talking of the Indians. How do you explain why China is actually a mediator today as a balancer, much more than India, which has given a lot of money to Maldives in the past? One year, I remember, India's foreign aid to Maldives was equal to Maldives' national budget. India has done marvelously in Nepal after the earthquake. I could go on. So all the cash goes into nothing. And China, which hasn't invested in the same way, not as aid, China is investing. Not so China gets to be accepted as a balance. Why is that?
I'm not surprised that you'd ask me a question which I will struggle to answer. It's a very sophisticated question, but I think we must look at China in its own backyard and India in its own backyard. Obviously, there are two parameters here, which is the only way that I can explain this. And one must be careful what one says on a public platform. But certainly, South Asia is India in South Asia is India's region. China in China's region is obviously a different border. And there is this quotation that I think one cannot aim to be a great power until one is perfectly in control of one's region. But also the salient fact is, if you look at Nepal, 1987, 1989, when the borders were closed. Look at Sikkim, look at Bangladesh, the issues of river waters, and there's still no agreement over the Teesta. Right? You can beat up somebody, but if you chop his water down, it goes to the war. And also, what is actually, I was talking a little bit earlier with Professor Ghosh, Chinese Deputy Ambassador speaks Sinharaja. Sinharaja is one of the oldest languages in South Asia. No Indian diplomat. And we have so many Indian Sri Lankan experts in Delhi. Not one of them understands the body language, the language of the majority of Sri Lanka. So look at the single-rated sense. I would love to answer that in greater detail, but I hope you'll understand. I hope we'll be able to take the conversation much further.
Okay, my
short question.
Okay, my question is for Dr. Choudhury. It's about the Rohingya issues where you said that India is a democracy, this and that, and they should take the Rohingyas in. My question is that why is Bangladesh not reminded of its own history when during the Bangladesh War of Liberation, 1.3 million of people died. It was almost like genocide there. You yourself are victims of human rights abuse. So why is there not the same sympathy towards the Rohingyas? At the same time, I've heard many Muslim leaders quoting the Prophet and say that that the Muslim Ummah is like a human body where one organ is hurt, the whole body feels the pain. But I don't see this practice with the Rohingya issues. And at the same time, I'd just like to remind Bangladesh that Bangladesh is an OIC country. So where is the Islamic solidarity? If you look at Malaysia, the same thing. The Rohingya issues is only used to score points. When I see the Prime Minister make speech about the Rohingyas, he keeps saying Allah Akbar, just to incite the Islamic sentiments. And Dr. Choudhury, our political scientist. So I would like to know from you, why don't the Awami League use the Rohingya issue to actually score some from the Islamic vote bank away from the Islamist parties in Bangladesh? Because if Awami League use Islam and welcomes the Rohingya, we actually take away some of the political points from the Islamist parties in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. You asked not one question, number of questions. First of all, you see, Bangladesh is not an Islamic country. Bangladesh is a secular country.
As a YC member.
It's YC member, but it is a secular country. It is not an Islamic country. It is this religious affinity for which Bangladesh is a member of YC or IC. Bangladesh is also a member of ASEAN, SAARC. Bangladesh is also member of many multilateral organizations. So, only because Muslim Bangladeshi majority are Muslims, does not mean that we are an Islamic country. It is a secular country, it is a moderate Islamic country, Muslim country. But what you say, the religious sentiment, you like it or not, especially the coming of Mr. Trump in America, these religious lines have become very prominent now. Now, there is an Islamophobia. I mean, you can see, you can feel Islamophobia. Bangladesh does not want to fall into that trap. We have given shelter to the Rohingyas on humanitarian issues, not because they are Muslims. If they are not Muslims and if the Buddhists were coming to Bangladesh, Bangladesh would have given shelter. We have Buddhist population in Bangladesh. We have Rakhine population in Bangladesh. Not a single incident has taken place. Untoward incident has taken place against them. So, but because of the religious affinity, it is true that Muslim countries were the first to respond to this crisis. Like, the First Lady of Turkey, she was the first one. We need dignitaries to come and visit the Rohingya camp so that the world focus is on the Rohingyas, because Rohingya issue is not Bangladesh's issue. It is an international issue. international community must solve it. Most importantly, the regional power must solve it. Because it is a threat to not only Bangladesh, but it is a threat to the region as well. In Europe, you say, we don't have an asylum system like Europe has. But even with that system in place, during the 2015 the Syria-Iraq refugee crisis, that solidarity in the European countries are almost fractured, and even now, it's divided on the issue who will get how many people. In South Asia, we don't have any system. I was talking to you, before, in private, the South Asia political system, the whole of South Asia's political system as an entity is very fractured. You cannot deny that fact. You see, India is surrounded, India has got small neighbors. Forgive me for saying so, but India is not like my neighbors. India has never suffered this issue with India, another neighbor. We have got, like someone here said, the water. See, this morning, our scheme ambassador was telling that the water resource must be settled in South Asia on the basis of river basin development. And Bangladesh has been given this proposal since 70s, when this Ganges water problem arose. This stuff we don't get during monsoon, but dry season. We get only 400 cubic of water. These issues, must be solved, in a brotherly manner, not as that you can dictate it to us. And when I say that why India, we expect that India will take Rohingyas, I know India will not take Rohingya because India has a different issue of the Rohingya. I don't know what that issue is, but there's in the newspaper we are always reading that Indians feel that Rohingyas will be a security threat, national security threat to them because they are all, what is called, terrorists. Everybody is a terrorist. Rohingya, is it a believable proposition? 1 million people cannot be Rohingyas. And also one has to remember that you have not visited Rohingya camps, I have. They live in subhuman condition. And if you keep them in that condition for a long time, they will be pulled by the extremist forces. And there will be also this kind of mentality of taking revenge. There are 50,000 children who have arrived unaccompanied. That means they don't have any parents. Then there are pregnant women, lactating women, the women who have been abused beyond measure. So it has to be looked at from humanitarian point of view, not as a Muslim, not as a Hindu, not as a Buddhist. If you level them that they are Muslims, they have come to Bangladesh because we have a common border. They just cross the Naf River and they can come here. And also the religious affinity. If they go there, they know that those who have gone to India are facing troubles. Except 16,000 who have been registered by the Refugee Human Agency. 40,000 I think is in court now. India is trying to deport them. And deport them means what? It is a violation of international norm. Convention, even norm of deployment, that you cannot send a person back who can face death if he goes back to his country of origin. So only wise will help. Why? I think it is international community. It is United Nations, it is India, it is China. Everybody should come forward to help Bangladesh's crisis. Because Bangladesh destabilized, and again this fear that they are all terrorists. If they are all terrorists, then Bangladesh will not exist. And if Bangladesh will not exist, no matter how high fence you erect, millions will go to India. You cannot stop. Like the Rohingyas, we cannot stop. Thank you.
Professor Mehra and then Professor Mehra.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have several questions, but because of lack of time, I just concentrate on two issues. One, are we being realistic by simply trying to say, that this region is Indo-centric. I mean, what is the point in trying to argue that, India is not going to be a dominant player? Given the nature of the structure of this region, India is going to be the dominant player. Now the question is, what kind of a player in the region? And I was listening to Dr. Lu, and she was making a good articulation on the differences between India and China, and that relates to the question that Professor Mehra raised about how is it that China is able to balance the region and India has a lot of problems in the kind of perception it has. Now, I have a proposition on it, and this question goes to Professor Choudhury as well as Dr. Delgoda, that the reason I think primarily is that China doesn't interfere in the internal political process. India does in the region. And it does because India is a part of the political process in these smaller countries, whether we like it or not. And my question now is that your politics changes in the perception that your political parties have of the relationship they have with India. Today we have good relations with the Awami League, so we have good relations with Bangladesh. It will change tomorrow if Awami League is replaced. The same thing with the history of Sri Lanka, whether it's the UNP or the SLP. And Pakistan, of course, I'm not including in this because we have a whole difference. Same thing with Maldives and Nepal. My specific question to Professor Choudhury and Dr. Delgoda is, would you be able to tell us what should have been India's position in 1971? Should it have intervened in East Pakistan or not? My question to Dr. Delgoda is, what should have been India's position in 1971 when the JDP was almost about to overthrow the state? Should India have intervened to help the government, which it did? And the question which obviously on Maldives, which no one needs to answer, is what should have been India's position when there was a coup in Maldives and India went to help out the government? So my question now is that, are these something, I mean, they cannot be undone. The fact is that how do we interpret this? I mean, is this the overbearing India which is trying to dominate the region? Or India in some senses has been a security provider? It depends on how we look at it. I think these issues keep getting interpreted, reinterpreted, but I don't know whether there's really a perspective on that. Thank you very much.
Should we take one more question before you answer? Yeah, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. This question. This is Hari Krishna. My question is to Dr. Namaru. I want to term China's Belt and Road Initiative as one-way street. As to mean that it is made for China to get a freeway access to all those countries signed up or engaged in the BRI for China's economic advantage directly and many others indirectly. BRI doesn't give access to those countries and equal free access the other way around into inroads into China, neither for the movement of people, products, or projects such as pharmaceuticals, IT, agri, a lot to name. That's why I want to term China's BRI as one-way street. We'd like to hear your views about this, or you give some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you for your observation. Let me tell you, your first question, should India not have intervened in 1971 during the Bangladesh war? My answer is sure, yes. And we are grateful for that. But also here I would like to point this out, that your interest, India's interest was also served when Bangladesh emerged as an independent country. Cannot deny that fact. For the first time, Nixon, who hated India, had to say that India has now emerged to be a regional power. Before Bangladesh, you used to negotiate, you get into multilateral negotiation. In case of Kashmir, so many times, USA, tried to mediate between India and Pakistan. Bilateralism, which is in the advantage of India, especially when it comes to India dealing with India's smaller neighbors, is a big bomb. Now this morning the ambassador was saying that you are sending electricity to us. We are happy. This kind of cooperation should be there. But the point is that we want to buy electricity from Bhutan. India says no, it is a trilateral negotiation. We must be in the middle. So you have not gained. That's not absolutely correct. Both of us have gained. We have gained, we have got independence. You have gained because you have emerged to be a regional power. And also, you have broken your number one enemy into two. That was, I think, was the best gift you could get. You destroyed two-nation theory. That was another big moment for India's favor. So, but Bangladesh, has been always paying tribute for your role during Liberation War. There is not a single official occasion in Bangladesh when we do not pay our gratitude to India. But we expect, people of Bangladesh, I am from East Bengal, meaning northern Bengal, because before partition, that's not what, my parents, they had more links with Calcutta than now I had with Calcutta. My father was educated in Calcutta because from there they used to go to Calcutta for education. So I'm saying that we all want friendship in India. You have to understand that. People of Bangladesh want friendship with India. We feel more at home with you because we have history, similar history, conflictual maybe. So what? In Europe also, they fought wars for so many years, but they live together. Shah was done, coexist. They coexist. We love to hear Indian songs. We love to see Indian dances. Lakhs of people go to India for tourism. But the point is that you have to give us our dues. What is called quid pro quo. We need water. You don't give us water. This is one thing which bothers every Bangladeshi, that we are not getting any water. Where is our Padma? If you come and see Padma during monsoon season, when I was in Gujarat, my father was a government official, so we used to live in Rajshahi, but on the bank of River Padma. After all these years, I went back to see Padma, and I was almost in tears to see the condition of Padma. That has to be quid pro quo, and what our Sri Lankan friend has said, to answer your question, the attitude is important. Attitude is that one Indian gentleman, I met him in an office, and he was mispronouncing Rashid Khan's name. He's our minister, a very famous one. I said, no, his name is not what you are saying. His name is Rashid Khan. No, his name is Rashid Khan. And he said that, I have always problems pronouncing your names. And I said, why? You are 100 million Muslims in India. Don't you interact with them? That you cannot pronounce our names? Attitude is important. We also deserve respect. We may be very small. We may be very poor. But that does not mean something people, like human beings, nation also expect, respect. And, they expect that people will give them the dignity they deserve. We want Indian friendship. This is a wrong concept on the Indian part, that Indians, Bangladeshis are against India. We want Indian friendship. If you do one favor, we really become overwhelmed. Now, we have given support, like when Sheikh Hasina went to India, or after she came to power, first time she came to power after this, Japan is one of the donors, development partners of Bangladesh. But when the question of giving support for the country who would contest or aspire for the permanent seat in the Security Council, we did not say that we will vote for Japan. We gave word to India that we will vote for India. So we have actually, there must be quid pro quo. Otherwise, you see people, we accept you are a big power, you are militarily powerful. In all respect, you are more powerful than Bangladesh. And we probably won't be able to do much to you, militarily or otherwise. But the point is that if you have a throne by your side, you will not be happy yourself. Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to thank Professor Mehra for his question, because now I can answer Professor Mishra, because you gave me enough time to think and reiterate it. This is the model that I see. China, with this port city in humble production we talked about, that's 1 year. It's a violation of all international laws. It's a complete slap in the face for a nation which has been Sri Lanka's only friend against Pakistan. What did China do? 2 W's. Watched and waited. Watched and waited. India can be defined in eyes. What does it do? Tone is imperative. It intervenes. It gets involved. Imperative. Intervene. Involve. Watch. Wait. Watch. Wait. A couple of other things. 1970s, India is a security provider. Now, I can only speak for Sri Lanka, but for 30 years, the LTT were actually, you survive only because you have safe havens, we know that. But arming, training, and then supporting, and then intervening in that. The reason the Indo-Lanka Accord is never going to work is because it was an intervention. Because it was part of Indian intervention in 1987 to stop the military offensive against the LTT. Perhaps if we had watched and waited, maybe the reaction would have been different. And if you compare that across the border, only the Shanti Bahini. Now, there are patterns which emerge. You ask why doesn't. In 1971, the interesting thing is there are no Sinhalese in South Asia. There is not a minority which India has deep and close cultural ties to. So that is another very important factor. Back to one last thing. The takeout is a very Singaporean thing. Takeout for me is actually you put it into governance and security. Can't govern if you're not secure. Can't be secure if you don't govern. And the point of institutions like IIS, which is why I was thrilled to discover Brahma Ward's paper, because by taking people out of the region, you become president. You see into the future. What I was thrilled by when I saw it was that 2 years before, an IIS paper has done a workshop at the cutting edge. Well, there's a paper at the cutting edge which none of us would have thought of at the time. And it has come absolutely true. And that is actually the takeout for your and for us. Just one more thing, I have 2 things I want to add. Cutting edge. This is the first time in a South Asian workshop that it has been accepted that China is part of the governance and security structure. We had an Indian Ocean conference in Sri Lanka, where China wasn't invited. So that is one thing is, again, we're doing new things. But terminology is also very important. Small. Sri Lanka is actually a medium-sized country. Bangladesh is a huge country. Pakistan is a small country. it's not. It's a huge country. So, I'm going to quote the Turkish ambassador in Sri Lanka. He said, again, now getting back to Professor Behra, you never intervene, you always intervene for your own reasons. You always intervene because you have interests. Also, something else he said, why are you always talking about being a small country? Sri Lanka is actually the 60th largest country in the world, something like that, not large, same size as Greece. It becomes small, why? Because you're Wikipedia. Smaller countries, it's a term of discourse and terminology, which is also another way forward for cutting-edge institutes to look at things differently. So you already taught me to look differently. I'm thinking differently. A few ideas for the future. Thank you.
So I will respond to the questions about BRI and whether BRI is a kind of China's one-way thing. And I think if we talk about this initiative, first we have to look at from the aspects of the intention. So intention is China's new opening up after 30 or 40 years of reforms, economic reforms, and it's connected with domestic development as well as international development. And secondly, there is a document of BRI which lots of principles are written in that. So there's a lot of reports and interpretation of these, but I think it is important to first look at the documents, and it's opened on the Chinese government's ministries of foreign affairs and Ministry of Commercial, and there's some principles on these which could give a clearer picture to say whether it is a one-way thing, because all that things we're just talking about infrastructure building and connectivities and making a community of common destiny and community of common responsibility. You may think this is a kind of rhetoric, but we can also think this is kind of visions. And if you do not have visions, so how we can, so then we will not have a clear direction. So I mean, this is kind of a Chinese way. So we'd like to have some visions or set great plans so that it can guide its direction. So it's a way of the current governments would like to do. And when we look at and put a BRI in a global context, it's a large things, but it's also connected with lots of small things, small projects, and with different countries. And we emphasize this is win-win things, and we emphasize the together to build the communities, and we like to deal with the stakeholders locally. And it's not like we're respected market rule. It is also written in the principles. So I mean, this is something that China will not be the only stakeholder. The others part which would like to join would be the stakeholder. The things that whether we can develop a better way to negotiate. And this is also Chinese government currently within its domestic sphere and urgently need consultancy on these things. There's so many enterprises going out to doing business, and big enterprise as well as small, but they all face challenges. This is something that China just go globally and met the other culture and met other countries, and we also don't know how lots of things we don't know. But there is something like intentions and principles, at least we can try to follow. And always, if we look at BRIs or there are also lots of good examples. We look at lots of reports from Africa. You have some bad reports, but you have also good reports. Even in the CPAC, which is a grand project, which is the biggest project in CPAC, you see it's lots of reports, and there are also lots of positive development. There are also some negative things. I mean, you cannot prevent, just like reforms in China, we just opening up, and previous in the 20s or 30 years with lots of Japanese or Western countries, they come and develop lots of things, investments, to invest in China, and we see this kind of opening up and brings Western values and Western influence to it. And there's good things or bad things, and you just need to how to deal with these things and how to adjust to good things to yourself and try to deal with the bad things, bad sides of the reforms or these. I mean, it won't be a one-way things if we can be more open up and all the participants, all the stakeholders try to think a way to set some common grounds. And this is, at least I think today in the early morning, Sriram Sirvan also talked about AIIB. AIIB China treated also as a tiny part of this grant part. So India can accept AIIB, that is great. I mean, there's always something that you can accept, then you accept it. And if you don't accept that, we don't accept. But if we can stick to some principles and then we can move on gradually, and I think that will bring a brighter, broader future. And anyway, it's something that we construct this kind of future. I mean, you always think zero-sum games or we think each other very negatively. I don't think that we can bring the things forward. This is my answer to your question. Thank you very much.
Well, a lot of things to mull about, a lot of things to think about. You know, in 1991, I was part of a 6-month program in the US on US foreign policy process. And as part of it, we were supposed to, meet a lot of senators, representatives, as well as State Department officials. And on every question that we used to pose them when they came to lecture us or when we meet them, was America's national interest. What we are talking here is, about common interests. Whether national interest of a country, particularly in the regional context, supersedes common interest is the question that we need to address ourselves to. I'll just give myself, that question on first, and I'll hand over to the organizers for the next announcement.
Thank you, Dr. Mehra, and our distinguished panelists. I would now like to invite Professor Subrata Mitra to present tokens of appreciation to our distinguished panelists. First, Dr. Dilara Choudhury. Dr. Sinharaja Tammita-Delgoda. And Dr. Anglu. Thank you, Professor Mitra. We will now break for a tea reception outside the ballroom. Please be back here by 4:35 p.m. Thank you.
Yeah, but I wish I